Our guest for this program is the author of the book, Star Trek Creator, the authorized biography of Gene Roddenberry, if you will apologize that brief little interruption there. This is the, like I said, the authorized biography, but more important than that, this is so comprehensive. It's the most comprehensive biography that you will ever read about Gene Roddenberry and the whole Star Trek phenomena to date. And David, I want to start out by asking you a question that is, it just leaps out at me from the back of this book right here, because I've read this and I've got to make a shameless confession. I've read a good bit of the book, but I haven't read the whole thing.
Well, that's certainly a change from a lot of people that have interviewed me who haven't read a damn word of it, so thank you.
Well, great. I'm glad you can appreciate that honesty and candor there.
I had an interview in New York where, even though it had been set up days, weeks in advance and verified the day before, I pulled up at the TV station. It was very clear no one knew who the hell I was. They were all scrambling around in the back to figure out what they could do with me. I was supposed to do a half-hour live. They finally ushered me into the studio, introduced me to a fellow who came out. Hello, I'm Joe. I didn't quite know whether I was supposed to kind of genuflect and kiss his ring or just shake his hand. He read the inside flaps to get the information, turned to me as we were about to start the interview and said, "Oh yes, I've interviewed Nichelle Nichols. My, she's full of herself, isn't she?" And then we went right to tape. And I thought I was going to do a half an hour. And at the end of 4 minutes, he goes, "Well, we want to thank David Alexander for..." And I was out the door. Thank you, goodbye.
Well, good grief. I mean, I certainly hope that he got his share of sound bites out of that one.
I certainly hope so, too.
Well, what you have back here, and actually, I don't know that you necessarily wrote this either, but it says right here, the Russians had just launched Sputnik 1, inaugurating the space age and renewing interest in science fiction. The first two television series designed to tap into the national excitement featured adult themes in a science fiction setting. As it turned out, the public wasn't that interested after all, and both shows stopped production after only one season. The next step, using continuing characters to explore mature themes, would have to wait a few more years for Roddenberry to create Star Trek.
Yes.
Which two shows are these?
Well, I wished you'd asked me that on the break, and I could have made sure I had both of them. The only one that springs to mind, yes, is right. So much for friendship, right, Dwayne? The one that springs to mind is The Conquest of Space with William Lundigan, produced by Ziv, and I think that was 1957-58. There was one that they did just before that, which was science fiction theater, that didn't have continuing characters but had a continuing character running it, Truman Bradley as the host. Both of those basically stopped after 1 or 2 years. They did another one, I think Ziv did another one called The Man and the Challenge, with George Nader. But it wasn't until Gene came along in '66 with Star Trek that a show with continuing characters in an adult drama with continuing characters in a science fiction setting made it on television.
And what do you think that Star Trek had that these previous shows did not have?
Well, it had a number of things. It had a setting that was very well thought out. Gene didn't believe that you had to explain all the stuff as so much science fiction did. Oh yes, Rocket Boy, this is a blaster and it's blah, 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 blah. People were too involved with the technology. We don't concern ourselves with microphones or chairs or the things that we take for granted as part of the 20th century, television sets and stereos and such. And Gene felt that it would be the same in the future, that you had a phaser and it worked and you didn't really concern yourself with all the intricacies of it. He was mostly interested in doing stories about people. What is adult drama? Adult drama explores one central question, and that is, what is it to be a human being? Or what is it to be human? And that's principally what Gene's stories examined.
And some of the themes that have came out in Star Trek. We mentioned on a previous program about his relationship with his father, and we're talking about somebody who was a child of the South who was coming to terms with some of the conflicts between realizing that, hey, there is a world out there, but, you know, there are some people who are bigoted, and if we're going to make anything of ourselves, we've just got to break through some of these prejudices. And that seems to be, when I look back at old Star Trek episodes, a continuing theme.
Well, interestingly enough, Gene's father's family, there's a whole bunch of Roddenberrys spelled with one R in Georgia, and in the 20s they had a canning company, cane patch syrup, and it was called Nigger in de Cane Patch syrup. Tells you how things, well, and it was a picture of a small black child in a cane patch eating a watermelon.
And that's what it actually said.
And that's what it actually said. Well, now, what was interesting was, before the civil rights movement swept this country, these people decided that that was wrong. I think it was in the early 30s that they decided, well, this is really not right. And so they changed that, and now it was just called cane patch syrup, with a picture of the cane patch, and the little kid was gone, and all the racial epithets were removed. And they were, in that way, they were quite progressive. What Gene showed in Star Trek was what we would be like, as he envisioned us, when we grew up. When we put aside the pettiness of nationalisms and racisms and all of that sort of thing, and looked at people, to coin a phrase, for the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
And Star Trek ran for, what, 3 or 4 years?
3 years. It was on the air for 79 episodes, if you count the 2 pilots as episodes 1 and 2. Did 79 episodes. Not really enough to go into syndication, but they did put it into syndication almost immediately the year after it went off the air. And that's where its audience was discovered. You see, Star Trek went on the air originally on Thursday nights from 8:30 to 9:30, and then they moved it to Friday nights from 8:30 to 9:30, and in their magnificent wisdom, the last season it was on, with some idea, knowing what the demographics were, young males 18 to 49, NBC, in their wisdom, put it on at 10 o'clock on Friday nights, which Gene knew was the kiss of death, which is the principal reason he pulled back and became the executive producer of the show and was no longer responsible for the day-to-day production, which is also another reason why we have episodes like, in the 3rd season, like Spock's Brain and the Omega Glory and other wonderful Star Trek turkeys like that.